Hello, everybody. I'm Matt Anderson, and welcome to The Road Not Taken, how ordinary people got out of their own way, and you can too. I am delighted to introduce our guest today, Angela Raub, who is the CEO of LeaderCast, whose purpose is to build leaders worth following. Her 20 years in a business development career has taken her in what she describes as an intentionally diversified career that's included higher education, including the College of Business at Georgia State University, real estate development, business services, and wealth management, so very diverse. Her current company, LeaderCast, has been around since 2010. Its mission is to fill the world with leaders worth following through two main avenues: impactful events and digital content platforms. Leadership Live, now listen to this, is the world's largest one-day leadership event with more than 100,000 attendees at 600 locations across 20 countries. That's amazing. And LeaderCast Women is the newest LeaderCast edition, which aims to provide all leaders with resources from top female leaders. And then lastly, Angela has been highlighted for her tenacious networking and work ethic on Good Morning America, Women Ethics, and Pink Magazine, and most recently was featured in U.S. News and World Report. So, Angela, fantastic to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning. How are you today?
Yeah, really, really well. So, for those listening, regularly, they'll know I always like to start out with kind of a fairly similar question, which is, if you had to pick one thing which has helped you the most in terms of getting out of your own way, what would you say that is?
I would tell you, and it's been an interesting process. And so when you and I prepared, or I was preparing for today, this is always a moment for me that, and you know this as a coach, that I love to talk about this one defining moment. So as I shared, there was a point which 10 years ago, almost to the day, I went through a reduction in force. Why it was so profound for me is that I actually thought I was walking in to be promoted. And so the weekend prior to that day, I walk in and I looked at new cars. Thank God I did not buy because I knew it was going to happen. And this was in a university system. And so you know what position it is, pay grade, all of these things. And I had followed, I've always been a rule follower. I'm a chronic learner, and I'm always about professional development. So I had just completed my MBA and thought I had done everything that required. I really believed I was part of the brand at the school. And as I walked into that moment, I quickly surmised when other people in my division showed up what was happening. And so there was a huge, significant shift mentally for me in that day. What I gleaned from that opportunity was I obviously was hurt. I realized that something I said I loved. You can't love something that can't love you back. And so there was a lesson for me in getting out of my own way because I falsely validated myself through work performance. As well as accolades. And, I've really continued to realize that unless I have my own worth and the people immediately around me, my daughter, my family, that I'm doing the best job I can with them. So that was a huge lesson for me. But through that process, I reached out to my network. And in that, I was introduced to 141 interviews and meetings in that 12-week time frame. I mean, I hustled it, and people that I had helped get me into interviews and conversations with people I did not know. Through that moment, and here was my defining moment, this existentialistic moment of where you're like, holy smokes, a gentleman that's very well connected and placing executives at the time with all of the Fortune 50, sat me down, and his advice to me, or his comment was to me, Angela, I've heard you've helped a lot of people in your life. Now I'm going to teach you the most important lesson in your life. And I'm like, this ought to be good. And he looks at me and he said, you are going to learn to ask people how to ask for help. And I literally in that moment, and it still makes my voice shake, had that moment as an independent, probably prideful person. And I would have told you I'm not. So that says I am, or was, that was the moment that this woman got out of her own way. And I suddenly realized that if you work hard and you do right by people and you take care of people and you're a servant leader, that by simply asking for help from your network, from your team, from your leaders in your organization, that for me was the moment that I got out of my own way. And it's been profound how it's affected my life over the last 10 years.
So have you been able to build on that? Because to me, and I've certainly, you may not know this, so for me, for many, many years, referrals was my topic, and I wrote a business bestseller on it. So I encountered it a lot with people where the whole nature of that is to ask for what you want. And I mean, and yet the irony is I shared before we started this live podcast was, my frustration grew over the years, the number of people that wouldn't follow through. And I'll be honest, I shouldn't say I never, I don't think for many years I really understood the inside game of, I guess, worthiness, that people are only going to ask for something if they really feel like they deserve it. And I don't think I went deep enough with enough people on that topic. Like, I gave them the strategies and the wording and the system and all those types of things. But it goes beyond that because, as you're sort of alluding to, there's an inside job involved with this. But what strikes me, what piques my curiosity about what you shared is that I could still see someone putting a ceiling on that. In other words, that it's okay to ask for a few things, but you're still going to bump into, I guess, this is not the best language, but it's the language I'm using at the moment is sort of, your own internal value and what you're worth asking for. So can you talk about how you've sort of managed to keep bumping that ceiling up?
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting. I just listened to a Brene Brown podcast yesterday, she and Oprah, and Brene's comment was, when people come to you, how we build trust, right? And so it's like people that are not worthy or feel worthy, yet tell someone that they love them or tell someone that they can trust them, yet people around them see them not doing that. Mm-hmm. So to your point, it's not only a worthiness, but it's the actually what you're saying and what you're doing, everything aligns. So as I always tell people around me is turn up the volume and watch people. So I think when you were giving people the groundwork, or here's how you can get to referrals, or here's how you can ask for help, it really does lie with the person. And so for me personally, when you talk about that ceiling, is at the immediate time, it was to ask for help as a single parent in the second worst depression that the U.S. had ever had. Mm-hmm. And how do you do that? I have taken that into every piece of my life. My teams will tell you I'm always asking for feedback, mm-hmm. which is also asking for help, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that sometimes we get in our own way, or we put a ceiling on ourselves for what that might look like, because we want to couch it, or we want to put it in a way that sounds like it's business-esque, like help me, spread my value proposition out to these people, where it could be, my business is struggling and I really do believe that I can provide help to other people. It's just a different way, see, in how I say that. But I think it's that vulnerability or transparency. We try too hard, in my opinion, which then comes off disingenuous, if that makes sense.
Well, you've lost me a little bit there. But probably because I'm stuck on certain things you've said already. I'm thinking, so I'll get one of them off my chest, even though it may not be particularly valuable to anybody other than maybe me. But, you made a comment about, and I use the word congruence, but, when what you're saying, what you do has to align. But it also occurs to me that I spent a lot of time, concerned about other people not asking for what they wanted to, or not believing that they deserved it. But I probably some of the same challenges, even though, yes, I absolutely am very proud of many of the things I've accomplished. I know I could have done far, far more. So it almost makes me wonder, what you said was, well, maybe people got a slightly mixed message from me on it, and therefore perhaps didn't run with the ball as hard as they could have, because perhaps I didn't give them enough faith that it was going to work. Although, again, I know that's not 100% true. What's that?
You didn't give them the ball.
Yeah.
We still want to, in my opinion, worthiness, or which can be in the form of pridefulness, or, I ran so hard as an independent single mother, mm-hmm. that became part of my brand, that I could do anything in those challenges. But I did greater disservice to myself, not handing someone truly the ball to say, take this ball and help me. And at that defining moment for me of getting out of my own way with this gentleman, it changed my life, because so the ceiling is, I don't feel I have a ceiling with that. Even as I manage up to my investors, I'm very transparent, and that in business can seem like, I'm crazy to do that. But I think if you're really transparent, but most importantly, people know your heart, that's how you really get the most out of that help.
And is that how you avoid looking needy? Because that was the other thing that I got stuck on when you talked about, you used an example about your business is struggling and you need help. I mean, my experience is if not just me, but whenever I hear people talk in those terms, or you get that vibe more often, because people typically don't talk explicitly in those terms. Yeah. Most people will run a mile, like rats off a sinking ship almost. So are you saying that the key to, I suppose, is to somehow, like you said, talk with your heart so that people know that your heart's in what you're doing. You're just having a bumpy patch. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And please remember, though, for example, if it's also going to be a trust factor, or how close some of those people are. If I would have someone come to me that I don't know, and they're like, my business is a train wreck and I'm barely making it, would I still have empathy and would I still listen to them? Yes. But if I have people that are in my network that are trusted, again, back to that worthiness, and they've shown that, I will reciprocate that. And I would actually go to them, run to them faster with my help, with them being honest. Now, if it's a perpetual habit, or it's something that they're continuously doing, I have some wonderful friends that are serial entrepreneurs that just can't find the right thing. And eventually you've got to look at, where am I not coming together on this? But transparency within the levels that you have the relationship, I think, are very important.
That's great advice. Okay, so I want to jump back to something actually it was a thought that I had when you talked about, the not getting the job, or actually being let go, correct, instead of promoted. Yeah. So here's what goes through my head when I hear that. I'm thinking most people would be gutted by that. They could be thrown off course for weeks, if not longer, by such an experience. And it sounds like you did the exact opposite. It sounds like you became intensely resourceful to line up 141 interviews in 12 weeks, so in other words, what's going through my head is, okay, this is not a typical response, I suspect, for many people that get a severe rejection. So how come you responded that way? Like, in other words, what I'm guessing it wasn't luck.
And like I've said, I'm always going to be transparent. I spent 24 hours crying my eyes out.
Okay.
So that's, and I couldn't find my way home, and I had worked there for almost 8 years. So when I was driving out of downtown Atlanta, I was going down one-way streets. Wow. People were honking at me. It's amazing that I didn't get in a car accident. Through that tears of 24 hours, I also had to go home to a daughter. And so I think that that for me, I had to keep it together. But you don't think I've lived a decade, quite honestly, a decade of, and last Friday I was actually asked back to Georgia State to speak to their women leadership group.
Brilliant.
I suddenly surmised on the way down there that it was almost the 10-year anniversary. And I cried in my car. Oh, wow. Because all of a sudden I was realizing, you talk about what comes around goes around, is something that gutted me and was devastating. And I felt like I had a bloody nose, outside and then internally for a long time as I processed that. That was, for me, a relationship of someone telling me, now you're going to celebrate what you deem to be your worst day. And this is going to be your best day, because you're going to talk about it and you're going to celebrate it with people that are still at that organization. So I was still wrecked, but I also worked in fear as well to get a job, because I was supporting my daughter and I alone. You understand, I've had to process that you can't work in fear either. So a lot of learning lessons have come through this, getting out of my own way.
But it's not, so you're saying you got some of the distress out of your system and then faced reality really quickly, partly because you had a daughter to support, and then And then did you ramp up, or did you sort of dive in with both feet and say, okay, I can't afford to feel sorry for myself. I've just got to get my act together. I'm just curious what your train of thought was in terms of how you handled that, because this is a model for people, right? I mean, I'll admit that it's only in more recent weeks that I've properly or better ingrained. I mean, I think sometimes I did it intuitively, but the whole notion of people complaining about, oh, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, and blah, blah, blah. And yet what often we're missing is we're not resourceful enough. We don't give ourselves credit for having any initiative and realizing that we can hustle. So that's kind of what I'm curious about, is you obviously hustled phenomenally well, but talk us through that train or the train of thought beyond that first 24 hours.
With that, after the 24 hours, I had a friend that showed up and looked horrible and opened the door. And my friend said to me, are you, regardless of any belief system for anyone, he said, are you done insulting God? Mm-hmm. I go, what? He goes, sometimes when things happen that we least expect, and to go from thinking you're being promoted to being let go, that is the moment. And so are you ready to rise up to that? Mm-hmm. And that spoke to me. If anybody's out there has seen the movie Dances with Wolves, my mom has called me Stands with Fists since she's seen that movie, because I'll be the last person out there. I'm loyal. I'm a fighter. And so that moment for me was, now you've got to get it taken care of. And so I rose up. And there was some ego in that still, and understand this is an evolution of working through that. I wanted to show them, okay, here I'm going to go. And 2 weeks later, they came back to me and asked me to apply for some positions. Mm-hmm. And I told them not happening. I had already got that pipeline going, but I went out and I communicated to people in my network. Once I started to say I needed help, meaning, I don't know if you know about jobs, but you and I both know, Matt, it's difficult to get employment through websites. Mm-hmm. So my resume was literally poured out to people I did not know, or opportunities that were open, because I was willing to make the ask. Mm-hmm. And that was a humbling experience. I think I wrote 300 thank you notes. The stationery company loved me, and so did the U.S. Postal Service. But it was just a very systematic. So I also recommend, when people go through difficult times like that, or very, what do I want to say, a moment that is significant in changing your life, is get system and process around it. I measure how much water I drink a day, so I'm a little bit of an oddball, but I've always been process driven. The process kept me in those guardrails mentally to just stay the course. And so help and humility became my highway. And then the process at which I did it was the guardrails of that road. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's definitely starting to make a lot of sense. And now my next thought wonders is, had you been in a situation remotely similar in the past where you'd learned the ability to, that when there is a problem, that the best solution is to, again, in my language, sort of jump in with both feet and almost put the blinders on, kind of so that you focus on that one thing? Had you learned that somewhere else?
Sure. I would have to tell you, I think being a young single parent, I mean, I started raising my daughter on my own at 27. And that is, for any single parent out there, that is a daunting experience. And some people are fortunate to have a person on the other side that's helping them in that process. I did for a while, but a lot of it was me raising my daughter. And I think through that is you work really hard and just put your head down, and you want to provide a life that is calm and peaceful. And, heck, I mean, back in the day, I remember once an embarrassing moment is, I forget which utility was suspended for 10 minutes because I wanted to make a late payment, right? So I think going through that has provided me so much opportunity to grow from that and stay focused in times that are distressful. And best experience of my life, and my daughter's my greatest success of my life. So there you go.
And I can't help it. I'm so good. Thank you for sharing that very much. And it's interesting because, again, people have experiences like the ones you talked about, and they don't recover. And it's funny. Another thought that's going through my head is, I mean, everybody has some significant challenges at times in their lives, and it seems like that distress then becomes this story that perpetuates, or that we talk about as the sort of somehow that we can't get past it. Yeah. And the irony is when I listen to you, I'm reminded of all the stories I hear about people that kind of flip it upside down, really, and say in their own, well, again, in different words, I've used my pain and challenges and turned them into, or made the best of them, such that they've defined a good chunk of my success, because I didn't let it beat me down. On the contrary, I decided to fight it. And it's funny because sometimes it can sound like a cliche. I'm just trying to think this out loud, really, when I talk, because I mean, some of the people I work with now in my masterminds, I mean, some of them have gone through, horrible childhood trauma, and my concern is I can see how it can define that person's entire life. So what I'm trying to say is it's great to hear your examples, which, while different, are equally incredibly challenging, and ones that have defeated many people, and turned it into a means to say, okay, this has made me who I am right up until today. And even though it's been really hard, it's now going to define why, who I want to become from now on. It doesn't determine everything about me. So it's just kind of a fascinating thing.
And I'll be really transparent with you. You talk about people in masterminds, and again, did not think that we would go there. But, as a child, I was hurt by a trusted, someone that was trusted by our family. Mm-hmm. And I did not deal with that until I had my daughter. And so going through the childbirth process released that for me. But I think that for me, in really looking at that process and how that's made me a stronger person, it also drives me. I participate in, I'm passionate about giving to the fight against human trafficking, but also working in outreach for that, because many of the people that are being trafficked have had some form of childhood abuse. And from that perspective, I get that. So I think that we have to, Andy Stanley is one of our just renowned speakers, just an amazing orator, but he's on LeaderCast stage every year. And Andy has a comment that I have taken into my life. You are the common denominator in every situation that you are in. And if you do not look at the scope of all your business or all your relationships, both personally and professionally, and see that there are common themes to the outcome of that, and I do look at things as an equation, you're missing the boat. And so to your point earlier about people that can continue to just deal with the same situations, they're not really attacking the problem, in my opinion. And then those that overcome it have chose to, you refer to it as being flipped. I look at it that you just want to say, I want a different outcome. How can I back out the results to get there? And Andy also refers to, if you see someone that's got a life that you're like, oh my gosh, this person has it together, seek that person out and ask them, what are the things that you've used that have positively influenced your life? What are your life techniques or your professional best practices that have got you to where you are? We live in a world of information. There are so many incredible positive opportunities for you to learn.
Well, those are some great multiple series of tips there that you just mentioned, specifically about using others as role models. But also, I'm hoping that I can fully get my head around the quote that you mentioned from Andy Stanley, that you're the common denominator in all your situations that you're in, and see the common themes to outcomes. Can you give an example of that? I'm just trying to fully flush it out in my mind, and I'm thinking, I don't do listeners a service if we dive into another topic, or we either lose people that are trying to think about what we just talked about, or can you elaborate on this?
Sure. Idea? So I think for me, if I would look back on when I went through this time 10 years ago, right, and I started assessing what are some common themes in my life. So by not asking for help and being in my own way, how did I hurt myself both professionally and personally? And those themes, I was the common denominator. I literally took a graph, and here we are, very nerdy at this point, and I started rating when I was most happy, and then what were those situations. And that became really a profound moment for me to look at myself as the common denominator. And then who were the other people involved? And that was both on a professional and a personal scale. So I think we all have friends or we all have colleagues that struggle with the same thing over and over again, right?
Right, sure.
And I think to help someone with, it kind of feels like you're dealing with this situation again. And I think you can only do so much of that because people have to want it themselves. But I think to really focus on that common denominator piece and how situations continue to look the same, I challenge people to look at 3 relationships that they struggle with either in the office or personally, and really assess what do they deem the problem. And I would surmise that 2 out of 3 of those would probably be aligned. And then I would come at those problems from how am I contributing to the problem, not making it better.
Where did you learn this?
Oh, I just have read a lot.
No, this is brilliant stuff. I ask because I've read an embarrassing number of.
I'm like, okay, are we good or are we going off kilter here? So you keep.
Oh no, well, because I just think it can't be more fundamental to helping people get out of their own way. Because and I think part of the other channel or one of the other facets to this as an obstacle area is this notion that either that change is hard or that we have to unlearn bad habits to become more effective with implementing new habits. I mean, clearly in my mind, I know we need to do some inner work, and you've given some brilliant questions here on some things to start thinking through on this. And then it's around having enough, I guess, belief in ourselves, at least enough that, as you said, first you got to want to make some changes, but then believe enough that you can make those changes. And obviously then we need to know how to do that a little bit as well. But anyway, I don't want to get too entrenched necessarily in it, because I don't want to go off so far off the topic of becoming a leader worth following. So transitioning then towards that, we've talked some about you, but I want one more piece on yourself though. So where does your interest come in leadership? So in other words, how come you're so passionate about becoming a leader worth following and being CEO of a company whose purpose is to help other people do the same?
I think it is founded on just servant leadership. Growing up in the Midwest, and we had a small working farm. My grandparents had a dairy farm and my grandmother, that's 98, still lives there.
Wow.
But I think that watching my family constantly serve others, it's their passion. And I loved the fact that my family did not seek accolades, that my grandparents, if another farmer was struggling, they were there. It wasn't about them hearing about it. It was you show up. Mm-hmm. And so I love that about the people that I come from. And so that is a passion for me. But I always tell people that I think my family thought I was a member of the Peace Corps for a long time, because all corporately minded, and in particular in finance. But when I worked in higher ed, and that's the first part of my career, I love helping people, talking to them about an intangible that truly can be a 2x or a 3x and getting them to the next or a better level in life. And so that's what drives me and why I'm passionate about leadership, because a 5-year-old little girl on the playground who encourages inclusive play, that's a leader. And how do we provide her the tools to become even better, but have that positive influence, have more significance on the world? And so I just want people to realize what they're truly capable of, and that they can have a goal and actually achieve it. But we've all got to help in how do we remove some of those barriers. So that's I wake up every morning, I can't wait to get here. Mm-hmm. I was LeaderCast, where it's an incredible company, and we help the world in their mission to be a better leader from either the solopreneur perspective or to the Fortune 50 that are our clients as well.
That's funny. So I kind of feel like we've got the same mission, or a very awfully similar one at the end of the day in some ways, in terms of helping people, I suppose, my language, be, do, and have more. So So is your audience? I know you just said your audience was everything from solopreneurs to people in the
Very
Fortune
broad.
50. Yeah, and I totally understand that, because I feel like, gosh, there's people all over the world that absolutely have the skills and the knowledge and the intellect, maybe, but that have very little opportunity to be exposed to what can help them. So I don't think it needs to be limited in terms of a niche. But I'm still curious where you focus your energies. So. So what is a typical, because I also noticed you've got your events as a key focus. So how do you focus your time in terms, well, I guess let's start with that.
Yeah, I would love
week
to.
or month.
Okay, we, and I'm just going to, for people if they just joined and just started listening, we are an 18-year-old organization, and we are deemed the world's largest one-day leadership event. Mm-hmm. So the day of the event, which is in May, our flagship event is, there are live attendees, anywhere from 3,500 to 5,000 people that sit live in an arena, and then we simulcast that out around the world. And that's the power and the influence, the incredible blessing that we have to reach all of those people. And then throughout the year, people are rebroadcasting our content. So the events is, we are experts. I have an incredible team that are experts in vetting and programming incredible speakers. And so we are really known to be a trusted source of leadership development speakers. So because of that demand and that very loyal community that LeaderCast has, we started the women's event 2 years ago. We're going on our third, and that's growing at 2.5 times year over year. So as you know this, Matt, people are dying to be better. I think the world we live in, regardless of someone's political orientation or any orientation, we all realize we're living in a state where we need better leaders. But we have to focus on being better for ourselves to get real results and to have that real ripple effect that's positive. And so that's what we really focus on, is how can people attend our event, both live or via simulcast, and walk away a better leader, which means we need tactical takeaways that they can really take that content and use it and apply it to their personal development plan, if not their team's professional development as well.
And then how do you work with companies or people on a more ongoing basis, or don't you? I'm not sure.
No, we certainly do. So throughout the year, corporations are purchasing our content and streaming it predominantly through their learning management systems, whether it's for talent cohorts, both on a regional level or perhaps a global level that they are deemed a high potential, or for those that have some of their younger programs. We've realized 4 years ago that we were sitting on our greatest asset, which was our content. And so we have several different products. We have a LeaderCast Now library that is 3 to 5 minute leadership solutions that typically larger organizations, individuals subscribe to it, but the larger organizations will purchase that content for their high potentials as well. It just depends within what that organization structure looks like. And then they'll stream our live full-length speakers as well and purchase that on a licensing basis.
And then how do they use the content? I mean, is it sort of part of does it then become sort of a group discussion? In other words, the video is sort of a Kickstarter topic to then discuss and maybe then start to include in bigger things like strategic planning? Exactly.
Excellent question. So for a multinational, just had a call yesterday, they stream, they view our content, and then they determine which of the full-length speakers they feel are aligned to their curriculum for the year, dependent upon those particular cohorts of talent that they're developing, as well as we're seeing now many organizations, multinationals in particular, are using the content within their employee resource groups. So the diversity and inclusion officers are providing them the budgets, and those different ERGs have different needs, right? That's what's so beautiful about it.
Right.
And so we will provide that. And so we may have a licensing agreement with 20 of their employee resource or business resource group officers, and then they will determine and plug and play, dependent upon budgets and what's been approved and what's been purchased, how they will use it. But those full-length speakers, we provide a transcript with that, as well as those takeaways and a speaker recap, as well as we produce a speaker promo video. So we help the organization in that whole learning and development, pushing and pulling content. So they'll push that video out to determine their levels of interest for those groups as well.
Oh, I see. Okay.
We try to have the whole product wrapped up for them so they can go out and their leaders can deploy it, dependent upon, you talked about their strategy, what their human capital strategy is.
Well, it's funny because I was going to ask you about content. Either how do you decide what to choose, or also is there anything that you notice is becoming more in demand than in, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago?
Absolutely. And we all hear it. And so nobody's going to say, oh my gosh, this was a shocking moment. Change. The rate of change for all people at the top of the organization to the bottom are feeling like it is moving so quickly. And then coupling that with a matrixed organization, people feel like they have professional schizophrenia, right? They don't know, like, who am I reporting to this week? I just spoke to a woman last week. I was at a site visit with one of our corporate clients, and in the last 6 years, she's had 7 new leaders. 6 years, 7 new leaders, which has led us, you started to talk about our topics next year. Our theme for LeaderCast 2020 is positive disruption. So we're going to flip the thinking that let's all just call it what it is. Let's be honest that we all live in a state of change. But what are the ways that you can deal with it positively that can be very effective for you both personally and professionally?
That's funny. So I don't know if you've had a chance, but you must listen to Mike Maddock, the podcast I did with him, because he's an author. He speaks around the world on disruption. He works with Fortune 50 companies. But he would be he might be he's a TED Talk. He might be a fantastic speaker for you. I'm actually having lunch with him on Friday. In fact, complete coincidence. And I don't know him that well, actually. I interviewed him and I just want to get to know him better. But my point is he might be a great person for that. But that's really, it's funny you talk about change. And this is the most, it's not a silly example actually at all. It's actually a really sad example. But in terms of how this affects everyone, I know this isn't it's my boy you're talking about, but like my aunt is, she's nearly 80, but I was talking to her over the weekend and she made this a really sad comment about how she just feel like life has completely passed. Like she just said something like, I just can't keep up with all this change. Like she was talking about technology, but she meant it in a very deep way, as if, she truly sounded defeated by it. And I think you're right. I feel like too, it doesn't get the airtime you would expect it to, because I still feel like my generation, many of us in this generation anyway, are sort of wandering around slightly befuddled by how much change there's been in terms of the fact that my generation is the first generation that didn't. I'm generalizing them, but they didn't do better than their parents. We all grew up with this expectation that we would be 1 or 2 notches further ahead of our parents. And I think there's many people in my age bracket that are still feeling kind of blindsided by the fact that they're not. And that's just one. Well, there's 2 quick examples, but I just think that topic is. Plus, it's never going to. The rate of change probably is never going to change. If anything, it's only going to speed up. So I think you're onto some incredibly compelling topic, and I don't know if you're just talking in terms of the corporate work world, but I think just lives in general, and the schools are probably as big a culprit as anybody, because they're the last to change sometimes or adapt to what's going on. And maybe you feel differently, but certainly I don't know. But
no, I agree with you. And just even think about it, Matt. Obviously for people that are on a dating app even, right? And they sit there and they swipe different directions, whether they're interested in someone or not. And then you hear about people being ghosted. So ghosted is someone's talking to them and they go out and then they never hear from them again. And then they're like, whatever. And so I sit and listen to the young people that I mentor, and I'm like, my gosh, their level of angst in the corporate world, coupled with what they're dealing with personally.
Yeah.
That's why I was speaking to someone last week at the university, and there are more occupational or anxiety animals for college students now. Are you aware of this trend?
No.
where colleges and universities have therapy animals, they're now permitting it because of students' anxiety levels. So imagine in our dorm, when I was in school, I lived in an all-women's dorm. Now it, inclusive as it should be, but with everybody having different animals. So think about just how the dynamic, but that's in part because of all these students feeling so much anxiety with the rate of change. So I think that we've got to really look at how this is changing. I have a friend that's created a new category in workforce development between academics and corporate America, because there's this huge chasm because they're not being developed in college. They have all this anxiety, and yet they hear about how crazy the work world is, or our generation of raising them and our kids seeing us drive it. And they're like, I don't want any of that anyway, coupled with that anxiety. We are at a severe tipping point. Hence why we're motivated to talk about, we've got to get a positive view of this, just like the worthiness of a person's self. We've got to know that we're worthy enough. We've got to solve this. It's going way too fast, and not saying technology won't change. Goodness, we all have great benefits from that. I just think we have to learn how to manage it differently.
Well, we do. And it's funny because what you say, forgive me, but I've heard that said so often, and I used to buy into it, and well, it's not true. I think it's a very dichotomous subject. I think we all benefit, but also what troubles me is that there's not enough airtime on how it raises expectations as far as what we get done, but no one actually gets any kudos for getting more done because it becomes expected. And so all technology does is it speeds everything up. And I'm not complaining about it. There's nothing that can be done in terms of slowing it down, but that to the extent that it makes our lives better is interesting in light of all the examples that we both just shared, that all are really very stress-inducing ones. Yes. That people need. I suppose what we all need more of are different, I don't like the word coping mechanisms, but that's the first expression that comes into my head. But I'm glad we touched on this subject because I think it's absolutely fascinating in terms of sort of the trends you see and just the opposite of that. Are the topics that you see people having a lot less interest in than perhaps 10 years ago?
Yes. And that's the thing when you're speaking to people, and you talked about where are we coming up with themes. Obviously we're listening to our clients, right? To our community. But we're also going from our mission statement and our values, and we really try to go off of those. But we're just hearing more and more people are dying on the vine, and to be part of a trusted community, we take that very seriously because people trust our content. So we're even seeing, although everybody can go out and have so much access to free content out there, if you do a search on leadership development, and this based on it's what is it? I forget how many billions of words and all the different articles and everything, all the resources you've got, that we hear over and over again, no, you're a trusted resource. And we're seeing companies come to us in particular for those 3 to 5 minute business solutions from everyday leaders. So yeah, we have a big problem going on.
What do you mean when you say people are dying on the vine?
I think people want to be better. I think that it's dialing in on positive and trusted content and what that looks like. And if it's really getting you to better and more diverse thinking from different people's perspective and so when I say dying on the vine, I think that people are dying for nourishment. In that regard, I think people do want to be I'm an internal optimist. I believe people do want to be a better leader, but I think they have to be open to being more diverse and inclusive in thinking.
I couldn't agree more. So I want to ask you about any changes you've seen since Donald Trump became president, because one of the theories I've had in my own head that I've never aired, other than to my wife, is that even ever since he became elected, I said, good things are going to come from this. There's going to be backlash in different areas in terms of people who are so turned off by things that have happened during this presidency that and not just in this country. I mean, it's happened in the UK and in other countries as well with some of the people that have been elected. But I'm just curious if you've seen any of that in the real world, because it's, to me, like I said, to me, it's just this theory that more people are going to become engaged in politics and leadership because they're so upset by things that they've seen and experienced in recent years. Is that absolute nonsense, or do you see evidence of some of that?
Well, I'll just speak to the climate of the world. So because I see people, and in particular friends. I just met with a friend this weekend that, is considering running for office. Mm-hmm. And her question was, tell me I'm crazy, or, and I'm like, I think you should do what you feel like you're led to do. And so what I see the good coming out of the world that we live in today is I think people are starting to rise up. But again, that's got to be focused on, they've got to get themselves right first, mm-hmm. right? And they've got to be the best leader they can be in order to positively affect the world. So I think that the world we're living in is starting to say, wait a second, I want to be a better leader within. I think the climate we live in makes all of us look at ourselves mm-hmm. and determine, mm-hmm. am I like, I'm not pointing people out, and I'm, but where do I have those tendencies, or have I ever said something like that? Mm-hmm. I think that we're getting far more introspective, and I think that's a great thing. You're hearing all the time, and for example, like my friend saying, she's going to put her hat in the ring, and is asking, is she crazy? If you're led to do something in this day and age, again, remember I talked about that little girl on the playground. Mm-hmm. We're all leaders. It's just time we start all making a stand to be positive and diverse and inclusive in our thinking, but most importantly in our actions.
I want to ask about the becoming a leader worth following in terms of recommendations, but at the same time, it feels like a silly question, because I know it can't. There's no way it can be. There are straight, necessarily simple answers. But what are some good, 2 or 3 things that come to mind that you just see with people that you're trying to help? In other words, people that come to you saying our company needs more diverse leadership. What are some recommendations that you make kind of typically up front?
It's interesting because, I think you get by now I'm pretty transparent and straightforward, mm-hmm. but I will always start when people are commenting or going over their strategy for talent and developing their leaders is, if it's private, if they don't have a counterpart in there, and I'm speaking to a global leader of talent development, is talk to me about your leadership style. And that tends to catch people off guard sometimes. Mm-hmm. But with that said, is our organizations, what we think our culture is and what our culture actually is are 2 very different things. And I can pick up pretty quickly if someone is great at developing their talent because of the strategy, but if their teams are feeling that they are nourishing something that people just can't get their hands on, what are we missing? Then they need to look at their culture. So to answer that is when I have those conversations in corporations, are you being the leader of the kind of culture that you want to grow at the company? And because we all know if you truly have an incredible culture, your returns, if you're strictly about what your financial returns are, it will be there. If you have a diverse table, we can show multiple reports that if you're diverse and inclusive, look at the organizations that have greater returns, right? Mm-hmm. So all of those things can be proven. But again, it's got to be the leaders of those organizations, leaders of those families that are truly looking at themselves to say, here's what the real landscape is. Here's what we deem the problems to be. And from that, we can determine, okay, where can we help you and supplement you with some solutions to be a better leader through our content.
I think you've answered this already, but I want to ask it again, just to hear more on it perhaps. So, I don't know, a couple months ago, I interviewed a guy called Matthew Jackson. He's a Stanford economics professor, wrote a book called The Human Network. And the basic thesis of his book, and I'm coming directly to diversity, is that, the entire globe pretty much is guilty of growing up in its own little bubbles. He calls it homophily, which is a fancy way of saying, again, that we tend to spend time with people just like us, that look like us, that have similar economic backgrounds and so on, and that it's horribly limiting. And it's in nobody's best interests, including the people in each little bubble, and not just because of the obvious thing like opportunities that it deprives us, but also deprives us in terms of ideas we're exposed to. But he also says that we're like a lot like apes, and we mimic the behaviors around us. So what we learn is basically what we learn right around us. So anyway, coming back then to the diversity thing, so what I'm saying about that is that clearly this is almost an innate human trait, so awfully deep-seated, deep-rooted. How do you get inside people's awareness to help them recognize that diversity is in their best interest as well as everybody else's? Great question. And I think this will be more indirectly answering it, but you talk about that, and I'm hugely passionate about that. We should have tables that represent the world, right? And we were recently asked about how we select speakers for LeaderCast. And we've had an evolution of our company history. And my comment to them back was, we select speakers based on the people that are our audience, right? So for us, we are passionate, and we must be running a speaker cast that represents the globe. And so to that point, you can say, well, we're just going to keep kind of going with the same speakers. I look back sometimes on we have an amazing history of people that have walked across our stage, Malala, Nelson. I mean, really? All of these leaders. Wow. But we had those were interviews that were done and then simulcast in. But we've had just incredible affiliations, but we are really focused on, it can't just have representation of a few people that are diverse across the board. And we're really proud for our women's event that we have been strategic and intentional on diversifying that stage. So people have to get there, and those have to be really open and honest conversations. And that sometimes can make people feel uncomfortable. But I think once we are willing to acknowledge that, and then I always go into it from the point of, okay, let's look at these Fortune 500s or Fortune 50 that have such diverse boards and leadership teams, and look at what they're doing in the market. And you can't, if you want to start from the financial end of it, from a human perspective, it's just how we all need to be living to be better. So in other words, you're saying it's not that hard to really show that to people, because you can literally, if it is around strength of a business, you can show them the numbers in terms of the ones that have the most diverse groups of boards, that they're the ones that end up doing that. That's really okay. So there was a fairly simple answer, but anyway, and I know we need to start wrapping up here. So in doing so, going back to the day you had that unpleasant shock with the expected promotion that turned into a being let go, since that day, who would you say you've become?
Oh my gosh, you did not inform me that this would be this heavy on the end, man. I hope that I have become a leader worth following, because I hope that I have become a woman that's far more intentional about leading my team and leaving them better every day. But I hope from the perspective that every interaction I have with strangers, with family, that I leave someone better than when we started. Meaning, it could be a brief interaction at a gas station, but I greet someone with a smile. And so to be far more present and intentional in the interactions that I have, to realize, because I realized those were the most impactful. So to have a gentleman that I didn't know, who's someone that was just one of my old students that came through the MBA program, that talked about how profoundly I impacted their life, that they're now a chief people officer, that for me was like, really? I'm looking at you like you're an academic stud, and now you're helping me. And so I think to be more present and intentional in what I do and how I lead people better.
Oh, that's brilliant. And then lastly, what are some good ways for people to keep in touch with you?
I would love for people to feel free to connect with us at leadercast.com, excuse me. Mm-hmm. You can put any inquiries out there. If you'd like to reach out, I can be reached on LinkedIn, Angela Raub, and Instagram as well. And I would just love for people to take a look at our women's event. The speaker cast is absolutely incredible. It's on October 18th. And we will have live attendees here in Atlanta and then simulcast around the world. The theme is Take Courage. And we have just an incredible cast of women. Founder of HGTV, Susan Packard, Priya Parker, Lovey Aya, Lisa Ling, Glennon Doyle, Kendra Scott. And so this is going to be a powerhouse. And so reach out, but in any way that I can ever be of assistance or to help leave someone a little bit better, please know I make myself available. And to you, sir, I have to let you know I'm on your podcast because once I saw the title of it, the Robert Frost has that poem I've read at 2 graduations in my life when I've given commencement speeches. So means a lot, man. I appreciate the invitation. Yeah, well, thank you. You're up to such noble work. And I hope anyone listening and certainly as I meet more and different people that they can send them your way too, because it's jugular stuff that you're doing. And I also say yes, even more so I think in this day and age than perhaps even in the past. I think there's a real lack of high integrity leadership. And as you said, we've all got to start from within. And so this is the place to start, but who knows where we can be 3, 5, and 10 years from now. So Angela, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Listeners, again, there's some brilliant insights and suggestions and strategies and mindsets, I would say, in terms of handling challenges as well as the way to be moving forward. Some of those will be shared on the show notes at matt-anderson.com. Otherwise, thanks again for listening. Do make sure that you, again, take a look at some of the other stuff that I'm working on, including some of the, if you want to take action on this, certainly Angela's got programs that are great, and I do too, around specifically around masterminds. And but then otherwise, keep an eye on the work the LeaderCast is doing in the future. Otherwise, I'll wrap things up with my favorite question, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken.